Story 1. At the last wedding I went to, the groom was doing drugs with his friend in the back room right before the ceremony. He could barely walk down the aisle and passed out before they got through their vows. The bride and her mother left crying. They actually got married about 2 weeks later and now have a 2-year-old. Story 2. The groom ran away the morning of his wedding. After 2 days, he contacted his family and told them he was in another country and didn't want to get married yet. His family pressured him to marry a woman he'd only known for 2 weeks. The bride was very upset, but she and her family understood the situation and moved on. Story 3. I had a friend who canceled the wedding in the morning but still held the reception that night. Apparently, the bride's family didn't approve, so they didn't go through with it. Only the people invited to the small ceremony knew, so many people at the reception didn't. The guests congratulated them, and the bride and groom just pretended to be married. They ended up getting married in secret 4 months later. Needless to say, the reception was awkward for those who knew. Story 4. My friend got married, and the man she was marrying had a heart attack literally right before the ceremony after everyone had arrived. Of course, everyone was shocked, but they got married at the registry office shortly after, so it was still a happy ending, I guess. Story 5. My friend was friends with a guy who was getting married in another country. So about 50 people had booked flights and accommodations. The night before the flight, they canceled the wedding, but insisted that everyone go anyway because most people had used their vacation time for it. The bride and groom got really drunk on the flight, which apparently was incredibly weird for everyone. They've been seeing each other off and on ever since, but have never tied the knot. Looks like everyone had a good vacation anyway. Story 6. My dad was the best man for his longtime best friend. The couple got married, they had the reception, and then after the reception she left and never came back. Not one day of married life. He went back to the wedding house alone. Story 7. This happened about 20 years ago. I am Indian and I was supposed to marry a man who was a close friend of the family. This guy was nice and all, but on the wedding day he ran away with my younger sister. So my whole family was very upset and demanded his younger brother as compensation. I married his younger brother. Our marriage turned out great, like one of those dream marriages you see on TV. But yes, the marriage was an accident. Story 8. My friend who's a DJ told me this story. The wedding went well into the reception, and it was time to cut the cake. The groom smashed the cake in the bride's face, and she was furious. She turned red, screamed at him, and punched him in the face so hard it sounded like a gunshot and echoed through the reception hall. Everyone gasped. She stormed off. A little while later, the father of the bride went up to the DJ and handed him $500. He said, "Listen, this wedding is over. She's actually left the building. But I paid for this party, and all my family and friends are here. I want you to finish the night, keep the music playing, and don't mention the two of them for the rest of the night." He agreed and everybody had a great time. Story 9. This happened in Calcutta. The couple had been introduced to each other, and after about 6 months of hanging out and getting to know each other, they got engaged. They had known each other for almost a year. On the night of the wedding, a group of people showed up and literally blocked the road so the groom couldn't get to the wedding venue. It turned out that the groom had been sleeping with one of the women from the blockade with the promise of marriage. He even went so far as to introduce himself to her parents and family and plan a future date for his parents to meet hers. There was a standoff for about an hour. When the information got back to the bride and her family, they called off the wedding. The guests were half in shock, half trying to eat and drink as much as they could before the inevitable cancellation. Story 10. I used to work with a girl named Ashley. She was engaged to a guy I never met. He traveled a lot for work, or so I was told. We became pretty close friends, and a few of us were invited to the wedding. A few days before the wedding, I heard some coworkers talking loudly about something terrible that had happened. I went over to find out what was going on and found out that Ashley had called off the wedding. Family and friends had already flown in from Utah. It turned out that the fiancé was actually a terrible lowlife. He had no job and was stealing from her. She decided not to go through with it. Silver lining, 3 months after the canceled wedding, Ashley and I started dating. She later told me that she had doubts about the marriage and that she had feelings for me, which I didn't know I had until after the ordeal. We have been married for 5 years and have a son together. When people ask how we met, we leave that story out. Story 11. I was taken to a wedding by a friend of mine. I knew no one there. I was kind of just dumped with the groom and his wedding party because my girlfriend was a bridesmaid. The groom and his buddies got drunk and just left. Not telling anyone, just leaving. So here I am, not knowing anyone. I had to go to the room where the bride was getting ready, knock, ask for my friend, and explain to her. She and I pretty much just had to break the news. We have since broken up. I had no reason to keep in touch with the bride or groom, so I have no idea about any follow-up. Story 12. My friend and his girlfriend had been dating for about 5 years and were getting married. Everyone approved of this woman too, educated, smart, and good-looking. On the day of the wedding, he left his cell phone in his jacket in a room where the wedding was going to take place. Normally he'd be the first one to turn it off and leave it somewhere, but I guess he had to call his cousin who was late for the wedding. When he got to the room, he found the bride making out with a friend of the bridesmaid. Story 13. I worked a wedding where the couple broke up during the reception. The party was on the roof of the building and there was a small pool. The groom got drunk and thought it would be funny to push the bride, in her full wedding dress, into the water. It was quite early in the reception. She stormed out and was taken home by a friend. Story 14. We're Canadians and we went to the US for our wedding. Everything went well, and the day after the ceremony we went downtown to the government office to get all the official paperwork. We filled everything out, signed all the lines, gave them our address, and flew home a few days later. We waited about a month for our paperwork to come in the mail, but it never did. I called the government office and was told that they had no record of my or my husband's name, identification, or paperwork. When I asked what I could do from another country, they had no idea. We will probably get married again, but I really didn't want to get married in this town. It's weird I never saw myself getting married, and now that I am, I'm not. Story 15. The groom's mother spilled something on the bride's dress. The bride flipped out and cursed the mother-in-law. The groom was in a state of shock and demanded an apology, but his future wife refused. He walked out. The guests tried to talk to the bride and groom, but they wouldn't have any of it. Story 16. It was my own wedding. I was there waiting, and my bride-to-be texted me that she wasn't feeling well and had to go to the hospital. I became suspicious when I noticed that no one from her side of the family had shown up. Turns out they never sent out their half of the invitations and never bothered to tell me there was no wedding. So there I was with my friends and family at a wedding that didn't really exist. Story 17. The groom left the bride at the altar. He just didn't show up. He said he had cold feet. The couple stayed together and planned another wedding. He stood her up again. Somehow they stayed together, and she agreed to try to marry him a third time. He showed up, they were married, and they have now been together for over 45 years.